The Interspecies Combat Championship represented everything the galaxy held dear about civilized violence. Held once every decade in the magnificent Nexus Arena, it showcased the finest warriors from across known space, each species sending their most mathematically perfect, genetically superior, and strategically brilliant combatants to settle matters of planetary bragging rights. The tournament had evolved into something resembling a cross between gladiatorial combat and a university thesis defense, complete with peer review and footnotes. For the past century, 3 species had dominated the championship with the kind of predictable consistency that made bookmakers weep tears of boredom. The Zenthari, those walking crystal formations who calculated combat probabilities down to 17 decimal places, approached fighting like a particularly violent math exam. Their warriors spent decades perfecting algorithmic responses to every conceivable combat scenario, their crystalline brains processing trajectory calculations faster than most species could blink. They fought with the cold precision of a computer program. If computer programs could shatter bones and look smugly satisfied about it, the Vexkai brought a different flavor of superiority to the arena. 6-armed humanoids with reflexes that bordered on supernatural, they treated combat like an elaborate dance choreographed by caffeinated hummingbirds. Their training regimens involved meditation exercises that would make monks weep, and speed drills that required specialized equipment just to track their movements. A Vexkai warrior could draw, aim, and fire 6 different weapons before most beings finished processing the word duck. They considered anything slower than light speed to be essentially stationary. Then there were the Morthork, because apparently the universe had a sense of humor about biological warfare. These walking mountains of muscle and natural armor plating made tanks look delicate. Their skin could deflect energy weapons, their bones were denser than most planetary cores, and their idea of light exercise involved bench-lifting small asteroids. Morthork warriors trained by standing in the path of orbital bombardments and complaining about the gentle mass. They approached combat with the subtlety of a collapsing star, and roughly the same destructive potential. Each species had developed training methodologies that bordered on religious devotion. Zenthari warriors underwent neural enhancement procedures that turned their brains into biological supercomputers, spending years in simulation chambers running combat scenarios with the dedication of particularly violent accountants. Vexkai candidates meditated in zero-gravity chambers while dodging laser grids that moved at frequencies designed to challenge their already impossible reflexes. Mortak aspirants endured trials that made surviving planetary extinction events look like a relaxing vacation. The galaxy had grown comfortable with this trinity of destruction. Betting pools opened years in advance, diplomatic relations were structured around tournament outcomes, and entire civilizations planned their military strategies based on championship results. It was all very orderly, very predictable, and very, very boring for anyone who enjoyed surprises. Then humans had to go and ruin everything by existing. The newest species to achieve interstellar flight, humans had been granted a courtesy invitation to participate in the championship. Most species viewed this gesture with the same benevolent condescension typically reserved for watching toddlers attempt advanced mathematics. Humans were adorable in their ambition, charming in their naivety, and absolutely doomed to provide entertaining fodder for highlight reels. They lacked the Zenthari's computational power, the Vexkai's supernatural speed, or the Mortak's biological armor. What they possessed instead was an alarming tendency to do things that made no mathematical sense and somehow succeed anyway. Earth's representative, one Ava Chen, had arrived at the Nexus Arena with the kind of understated presence that made seasoned observers immediately dismiss her as a statistical error. She appeared to be nothing more than a moderately athletic human female, lacking any obvious cybernetic enhancements, genetic modifications, or visible weaponry that might level the playing field. Alien sports commentators had already prepared their sympathetic obituaries, complete with touching tributes to human courage in the face of certain annihilation. The Zenthari calculated her chances of survival at approximately 0.00000001%, a number so small it required scientific notation just to acknowledge its existence. The Vexkai timed her reflexes during preliminary demonstrations and found them roughly equivalent to watching geological processes in real time. The Mortork tested her strength metrics and discovered she could barely lift what they considered a light snack. None of them bothered to investigate what humans actually trained for, Because honestly, who had time for that kind of academic research when you were busy being cosmically superior? This oversight would prove to be the kind of mistake that historians would spend centuries analyzing, philosophers would debate in academic circles, and comedians would mine for material until the heat death of the universe. The cosmic joke was about to begin, and the universe was already chuckling. Crixthan of the Zenthari had spent 5 years transforming himself into what could only be described as a sentient weapon with a mathematics degree. His crystalline form had been enhanced with quantum processing nodes that made supercomputers look like pocket calculators having an existential crisis. Every morning for the past 1,827 days, he had run combat simulations that analyzed 47,000 different fighting scenarios, each calculated to the microsecond, with variables including atmospheric pressure, gravitational variance, and the psychological profiles of potential opponents. His preparation regimen read like a doctoral thesis in applied violence. Neural pathways had been rewired to process combat data at rates that would make light-speed communication feel sluggish. His crystalline structure had been reinforced with exotic materials that could withstand the kinetic forces generated by his own mathematical perfection. Most impressively, he had memorized every possible angle of attack, defense, and counterattack for every known combat technique in the galaxy, organized into a hierarchical database that he could access faster than most beings could form a coherent thought. The Zenthari combat methodology was elegance incarnate. Each strike was calculated for maximum efficiency, each movement optimized for energy conservation and tactical advantage. Crixthan could predict his opponent's next 17 moves based on their opening stance, breathing pattern, and the subtle electromagnetic signatures of their nervous system. He had reduced combat to a series of mathematical equations where victory was not just probable but inevitable, assuming the universe continued to obey the laws of physics. Velnara of the Vexgai had dedicated 7 years to becoming what scientists might classify as a violation of several fundamental principles of motion and time. Her training had begun in centrifuge chambers that spun at velocities designed to liquefy most organic matter, progressing to gravitational fields that could compress carbon into diamonds. Each of her 6 arms had been conditioned independently, creating a warrior who could simultaneously wield multiple weapons while performing complex tactical maneuvers that resembled a particularly aggressive form of interpretive dance. Her reflexes had been honed to the point where she could catch individual photons, assuming photons were significantly slower and less elusive. The Vexgai training philosophy centered on the principle that if you could move fast enough, your opponents would appear to be fighting underwater while blindfolded. Velnara had mastered 847 different weapon systems, could switch between combat styles mid-strike, and had reaction times measured in units that required new mathematical terminology to express properly. Her preparation included meditation exercises performed while dodging projectiles fired at near-light speeds, balanced training on surfaces that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, and sparring sessions against holographic opponents programmed to fight with the fury of collapsing stars. By the time she finished her training, she could engage 6 different opponents simultaneously while composing poetry about the aesthetic beauty of perfectly executed violence. Gorthul of the Morthak had spent 8 years becoming what could only be described as a geological formation with anger management issues. His training regimen had involved progressive resistance exercises, using increasingly massive objects, beginning with small moons and working his way up through asteroid belts to entire planetary cores. His skin had been conditioned through exposure to stellar radiation, orbital bombardments, and weaponized singularities, developing a natural armor that made starship hulls look like tissue paper. The Morthak philosophy of combat preparation was beautifully straightforward. Become so physically indestructible that opponents would exhaust themselves trying to damage you, then end the fight with the kind of devastating counterattack typically reserved for planetary demolition projects. Gorthul had achieved a state where his casual movements generated seismic activity, his breathing patterns could alter local weather systems, and his heartbeat registered on gravitational sensors 3 star systems away. His endurance trials had included surviving at the core of active volcanoes, withstanding pressure equivalent to the bottom of gas giant oceans, and maintaining consciousness while being struck by lightning that could power small civilizations. He had developed the ability to regenerate from virtually any injury, process any known toxin as a light snack, and continue fighting long after his opponents had died of old age. Meanwhile, scattered reports from Earth suggested that Ava Shen had prepared for the championship by attending what humans quaintly called a gym, engaging in activities that resembled recreational exercise more than military preparation. She had apparently spent time hitting cloth bags filled with sand, running on mechanical devices that went nowhere, and practicing movements that looked suspiciously like elaborate stretching routines. Her training equipment could have been purchased at any consumer retail outlet, her instructors lacked advanced degrees in theoretical combat, and her preparation timeline measured in months rather than years. The Nexus Arena itself represented the pinnacle of combat venue engineering. Force fields capable of containing stellar explosions surrounded a fighting platform that could instantly adapt its surface composition, gravity, and atmospheric conditions. Quantum sensors recorded every aspect of combat down to the subatomic level, while holographic projection systems allowed spectators to experience battles from any conceivable angle, including several that violated causality. Betting establishments across the galaxy had established odds for human survival that required exponential notation to express meaningfully. The most optimistic predictions gave Ava Chen approximately 14 seconds of consciousness before experiencing what mathematicians termed rapid kinetic disassembly. Conservative estimates suggested she might provide entertainment value roughly equivalent to watching a soap bubble collide with a supernova. The alien champions had achieved perfection through science, dedication, and the kind of preparation that transformed individuals into living weapons. They had eliminated every variable, calculated every possibility, and optimized every aspect of their performance to achieve mathematical certainty of victory. What they had not accounted for was the possibility that mathematics might not apply to humans the way it applied to rational beings. The Nexus Arena buzzed with the kind of electric anticipation typically reserved for watching civilizations rise and fall in real time. Representatives from 847 different species had gathered to witness what promised to be the most predictable championship in tournament history. The atmosphere crackled with excitement, betting frenzy, and the collective smugness of beings who knew exactly how this cosmic joke would end. Holographic displays throughout the arena showcased final odds that required scientific calculators to comprehend fully. Human survival was listed at approximately 1 chance in 847 trillion, a number so astronomically unlikely that several gambling establishments had stopped accepting bets and started offering them as charitable donations to mathematical impossibility research. Souvenir vendors sold commemorative items celebrating what they assumed would be the shortest championship match in recorded history. In the crystalline preparation chambers, Krixstan performed final calibrations on his quantum processing matrices. His calculations showed a 99.9999% probability of victory achieved through optimal strike patterns that would render his opponent unconscious in 4.7 seconds. The human will provide adequate data for post-combat analysis, he announced to his support team, with the confidence of someone who had never encountered a variable that refused to behave mathematically. Velnara completed her pre-fight meditation in a chamber where time moved at 17 different speeds simultaneously. Her 6 arms moved through practice routines that created brief tears in local space-time, each gesture calculated to demonstrate the futility of opposing Vexkai reflexes. "I shall ensure the human experiences defeat with dignity," she declared, which in Vexkai culture represented unprecedented mercy for someone about to be thoroughly demolished. Gorthul required no preparation beyond existing in his current state of geological invincibility. He sat motionless in his quarters, generating enough gravitational distortion to affect the arena's orbital mechanics. "The small one will learn why planets fear the Morthok," he rumbled, his voice registering on seismic instruments 3 decks away. When Ava Chen entered the arena, the collective response resembled the sound of 847 different species simultaneously clearing their throats in polite embarrassment. She wore standard human athletic attire that looked like it had been purchased from a civilian sporting goods store, carried no visible weapons, and displayed none of the cybernetic enhancements or biological modifications that serious combatants considered essential equipment. Her entrance generated the kind of respectful applause typically reserved for particularly brave children attempting adult activities. The tournament officials had structured the bracket with human participation in mind, arranging for Ava to face all 3 champions in rapid succession. This format, dubbed the Gauntlet of Inevitable Defeat, was designed to provide maximum entertainment value while minimizing the duration of human suffering. Medical teams stood ready with equipment specifically designed for species that lacked the good sense to possess natural armor plating. Galactic media coverage reached fever pitch as expert commentators offered predictions that ranged from instantaneous to mercifully brief. The lead analyst for the Zenthari Broadcasting Network had prepared a 17-hour documentary on combat mathematics that would need to be condensed into a brief tribute to human courage. Vexkai sports journalists had filmed their commentary in slow motion to ensure viewers could actually perceive their rapid-fire analysis of the upcoming destruction. What the extensive media coverage failed to mention, mostly because nobody had bothered to investigate, was that Ava Chen happened to be a former Earth military specialist, whose background included training that humans quaintly referred to as classified. Her service record, had anyone accessed it, would have revealed expertise in approximately 47 different combat disciplines, 3 of which were technically illegal in most civilized sectors of space. Her instructors had possessed the kind of credentials that made alien war colleges weep with envy. And her training had involved scenarios that would have impressed even Morthak endurance specialists. The arena's quantum sensors hummed with anticipation as force fields powered up to contain what promised to be the galaxy's most expensive demonstration of superior alien evolution. Spectators settled into their seats with the satisfied confidence of beings about to witness the natural order of the universe reassert itself through applied violence. The cosmic punchline was approaching at light speed, and the universe was already preparing its biggest laugh. 3 champions who had trained for years to achieve perfection were about to discover that humans had spent millennia perfecting something entirely different: the art of making the impossible look effortless. The tournament was about to begin, and reality was about to experience what humans might call a teaching moment. The first match began with Crixtan executing what the Zenthari considered a perfect opening gambit. A 17 calculation sequence that would position him for optimal strike delivery while maintaining defensive superiority. His crystalline form moved with mathematical precision, each step calculated to maximize tactical advantage while minimizing energy expenditure. The quantum processors embedded in his structure analyzed Ava's stance, breathing pattern, and muscle tension, predicting her next 4.2 moves with statistical certainty. What happened next violated several fundamental principles of predictive mathematics. Instead of following any recognizable combat pattern, Ava did something that made Crixton's quantum processors experience what could only be described as computational indigestion. She stumbled slightly, appeared to lose her balance, and in the process of recovering somehow ended up exactly where Crixton hadn't calculated she could possibly be. Her apparently clumsy movement transformed into a textbook perfect counter that sent the crystalline warrior face-surfed into the arena floor with a sound like a chandelier being fed through an industrial garbage disposal. Fight duration, 10.3 seconds. The arena fell silent with the kind of stunned quiet typically reserved for witnessing the laws of physics filing for unemployment. Crixton's support team frantically checked their equipment, certain that their champion's quantum processors had malfunctioned. The mathematical impossibility of what they had just witnessed caused several Zenthari observers to experience the equivalent of mental blue screens, requiring emergency reboots of their neural pathways. Commentators scrambled to explain what had occurred, but their analysis equipment had recorded something that resembled less of a fight and more of a physics experiment gone entertainingly wrong. Ava had somehow turned Crixton's mathematical perfection into a liability, using his predictable patterns against him with the kind of tactical awareness that suggested humans might understand combat differently than civilized species assumed. The second match featured Velnara approaching the combat zone with the fluid grace of liquid lightning having a particularly aggressive day. Her 6 arms moved through preparatory sequences that created visible distortions in local space-time, each limb independently calculating optimal engagement strategies. She had analyzed the previous fight and concluded that Ava's success had been a statistical anomaly that would not repeat against Vexkai reflexes. The fight began with Velnara executing a 6-weapon assault pattern that should have ended the engagement before light had time to travel from the arena floor to the spectator seating. Her arms moved with synchronized precision that made hummingbird wings look sluggish, creating a whirlwind of perfectly coordinated destruction that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Ava responded by doing something that made seasoned combat analysts question their understanding of basic motor functions. She moved with what appeared to be casual disregard for the laws of physics, flowing around Velnara's attacks like water flowing around rocks, if water could throw devastating counterpunches while appearing to barely pay attention to the situation. Her movements seemed almost lazy compared to the Vexkai's hyperkinetic assault, yet somehow she remained exactly where Velnara's weapons weren't. The engagement ended when Ava performed what humans would recognize as a simple hip toss, using Velnara's own momentum and six-armed coordination against her. The Vexkai warrior found herself experiencing an unscheduled meeting with the arena floor. All six of her weapons scattered in directions that defied several theories about conservation of momentum. Fight duration 11.8 seconds. The crowd's reaction had evolved from stunned silence to something resembling mass psychological trauma. Velnaros' support team checked and rechecked their chronometers, certain that time itself had malfunctioned during the engagement. Several Vexkai spectators had to be treated for reflexive shock, a condition that occurred when beings accustomed to supernatural speed witnessed something that moved faster than their ability to process impossibility. Media coverage had devolved into incoherent babbling, as commentators struggled to describe events that challenged their understanding of how combat was supposed to function. The mathematical models used to predict fight outcomes had apparently suffered collective nervous breakdowns, producing results that suggested reality was experiencing technical difficulties. The third match presented what should have been an insurmountable challenge. Gorthul approached the combat zone with the inexorable confidence of a geological process that had developed anger management issues. His massive form registered on the arena's gravitational sensors, and his casual movements generated enough kinetic energy to power small civilizations. This was a being who treated orbital bombardments as therapeutic massage sessions. The Morthak champion had observed the previous engagements and concluded that human unpredictability was irrelevant when faced with the simple reality of trying to damage something that was essentially a sentient mountain with delusions of vulnerability. His strategy was elegantly straightforward. Allow the human to exhaust herself attempting to inflict damage, then end the fight with a single devastating strike. What actually happened was that Gorthul discovered the hard way that humans had apparently spent considerable time studying something called leverage, which turned out to be a mathematical concept that even Morthak invincibility couldn't argue with effectively. Ava's approach to fighting a living mountain was to not fight the mountain at all, but rather to convince the mountain to fight itself. Using what appeared to be a combination of basic physics and strategic positioning that would have made Archimedes weep with joy, she managed to redirect Gorthul's own massive strength into a direction he hadn't intended to apply it. The result was a Morthak warrior experiencing the novel sensation of being defeated by his own geological superior. Fight duration, 8.2 seconds. The arena had descended into what could only be described as controlled chaos. Officials frantically reviewed sensor data, searching for evidence of equipment malfunction, dimensional anomalies, or signs that reality was experiencing a software glitch. Spectators from 847 different species sat in stunned silence, trying to process the cognitive dissonance of watching their fundamental assumptions about combat effectiveness being systematically dismantled by a being who appeared to be conducting a casual physics demonstration. Medical teams rushed to attend to the three champions, who were experiencing various forms of existential confusion along with their physical injuries. Krickstan's quantum processors were generating error messages in languages that didn't technically exist. Velnara was moving at normal speeds for the first time in 7 years, creating a disorienting experience that made her question the nature of time itself. Gorthul was discovering that even geological invincibility had its limitations when applied incorrectly. The collective realization was beginning to dawn on the galactic audience that they had just witnessed something that would require new chapters in combat theory textbooks, assuming anyone could figure out how to explain what had actually occurred. Human unpredictability, it seemed, was not a bug in the system, but rather a feature that no one had bothered to account for in their calculations. Three champions had trained for years to achieve perfection, only to discover that perfection had a critical vulnerability. It assumed the universe would continue to behave rationally. The Nexus Arena had transformed into what sociologists would later classify as a controlled riot of confusion. Emergency protocols activated as 847 different species experienced simultaneous cognitive dissonance, their fundamental understanding of combat effectiveness having been thoroughly deconstructed in under 30 seconds of total fighting time. Medical teams rushed to treat spectators suffering from what physicians diagnosed as reality adjustment syndrome, a condition that occurred when witnessing events that challenged core assumptions about how the universe was supposed to function. The tournament officials huddled in emergency session, frantically reviewing sensor data and equipment diagnostics in search of some rational explanation for what had transpired. Their preliminary conclusions suggested either widespread equipment failure, dimensional interference, or the possibility that mathematics itself had filed for early retirement. The quantum analysis systems that had recorded every microsecond of combat were producing results that required new mathematical terminology to express properly. Meanwhile, intergalactic media networks had descended into what could charitably be described as professional hysteria. Commentators who had prepared hours of analysis about inevitable human defeat found themselves improvising explanations for events that defied their expertise. The Zenthari Broadcasting Network's mathematical combat specialist had suffered what appeared to be an intellectual breakdown, repeatedly muttering calculations that produced impossible results. Vex Kai Sports journalists were conducting interviews at normal speed for the first time in their careers, the shock having temporarily disabled their supernatural reflexes. The revelation of Ava Chen's actual background emerged gradually, as Earth's diplomatic corps found themselves fielding increasingly frantic inquiries from galactic intelligence agencies. Her service record, when finally declassified under extreme diplomatic pressure, painted a picture that made alien military academies question their admission standards. Former Earth Special Operations, with advanced training in 17 different martial arts systems, certified in unconventional warfare tactics and experienced in combat scenarios that would have challenged even Morthak endurance specialists. Her instructors, it turned out, had included practitioners of combat disciplines that combined ancient human fighting techniques with modern tactical theory, creating a hybrid approach to violence that emphasized adaptability over specialization. Where alien warriors had trained to perfect single methodologies, Ava had learned to synthesize multiple approaches into something that resembled improvised chaos, but functioned as highly sophisticated strategy. The three defeated champions displayed reactions that ranged from mathematical confusion to existential bewilderment. Crixton's quantum processors continued generating error messages, while he attempted to recalculate his understanding of combat probability theory. "The human's actions exist outside mathematical modeling," he announced with the tone of sometimes equaled purple. His grudging respect was evident in his request to study human tactical unpredictability for future algorithmic improvements. Velnara had discovered the disconcerting experience of moving at speeds that allowed her to actually observe her surroundings in real time. "Your species fights like flowing water that has learned to punch," she admitted, her 6 arms attempting gestures that conveyed admiration in 17 different cultural contexts simultaneously. Her analysis suggested that human combat techniques operated on principles that transcended simple speed and reflexes. Gorth Ghoul, still experiencing the novel sensation of having been defeated by basic physics, offered what passed for Morthak philosophical insight. "Small human understands that strength without wisdom is merely expensive destruction," he rumbled, his gravitational field fluctuating with what observers interpreted as respectful confusion. His request to train with human martial arts instructors would later revolutionize Morthak combat doctrine. Tournament officials, faced with results that threatened to undermine decades of established combat theory, attempted damage control through creative interpretation of regulations. They announced that human victory represented a fascinating anomaly that demonstrated the tournament's commitment to inclusive competition, while privately commissioning studies to determine if the laws of physics required updating. Ava Chen's response to her victory was perhaps the most bewildering aspect of the entire situation. When interviewed by increasingly desperate media representatives, she displayed the kind of modest embarrassment typically associated with accidentally winning a casual game, rather than revolutionizing galactic combat theory. "I just did what felt natural," she explained with a shrug that somehow conveyed both humility and the casual confidence of someone who had never doubted the outcome. Their suggestion that Earth possessed a few other people who might be interested in competing caused several tournament officials to experience what medical personnel diagnosed as anticipatory panic disorder. The possibility that humanity might possess additional individuals with similar capabilities had implications that threatened to restructure galactic power dynamics in ways that required entirely new diplomatic protocols. The cosmic joke had reached its punchline, and the universe was still chuckling at the expressions on everyone's faces. The universe, it seemed, had been operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about the relationship between preparation and effectiveness. While civilized species had spent centuries perfecting the art of specialized dominance, humans had apparently mastered something far more dangerous: the ability to make expertise look obsolete through sheer adaptability. The galactic community found itself recalibrating its understanding of human unpredictability, a trait that had previously been dismissed as charming naivety but now required reclassification as a legitimate strategic advantage. Intelligence agencies across known space began frantically revising their threat assessments of a species that could apparently violate mathematical certainty through applied improvisation. Tournament officials announced that future championships would include expanded human participation, a decision that caused betting establishments to implement new categories of impossible outcomes. Military academies started offering courses in unconventional tactical adaptation, while combat theorists began studying human warfare with the kind of academic desperation typically reserved for understanding quantum mechanics during a reality collapse. The three alien species that had dominated the championship for a century now faced the humbling prospect of learning from beings they had previously considered adorable in their ambition. Training methodologies that had seemed perfectly logical suddenly appeared as elaborate exercises in beautiful irrelevance when confronted with opponents who refused to behave predictably. What had begun as a cosmic joke about human inadequacy had transformed into something far more unsettling: a demonstration that the galaxy's understanding of combat effectiveness might have been fundamentally backwards from the beginning. Preparation, it turned out, could be a magnificent trap when it created expectations that reality refused to honor. The interspecies combat championship would continue, but with the sobering knowledge that the universe contained beings who could defeat mathematical perfection, supernatural speed, and geological invincibility using nothing more than the terrifying human ability to look at impossible situations and somehow find them merely inconvenient. The galaxy had learned to take humans seriously, and frankly, everyone was a little worried about what that might mean for the future of predictable outcomes.